We started Culturally Speaking to indulge our curiosity about the way others live and a desire to inspire conversations about how we have far more in common than we realise.
Okay, so this week's episode, I actually didn't get a chance to talk to Hope when we were recording this, unfortunately. So I feel like a listener listening back to this as we edited it, because obviously I spoke to her when we were talking about recording the episode, but I didn't hear her story firsthand. And I know you came off the call with Hope and said, yeah, you need to go listen to this. I guess let's start with the main topic, right? Grief, and how she lost someone incredibly close to her in a very, very harrowing way. And I don't want to quite give away the story. And we want to let Hope speak to it in her words. But I think there was also some sort of, as I was listening to it and she was talking about Hope and her story, I was like, there is some, I don't know if I believe in serendipity or coincidence, but just the amalgamation of that.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was doing some research on this topic, so hope is actually defined, so hope, not our guess, but hope as a verb, is actually defined as to expect something with confidence or to cherish a desire with anticipation. Now, those two being quite different things. Let's look at the first part, which is to expect something with confidence. I don't know that we use hope that way necessarily. I feel like we are quite often wishing for things when we use the word hope.
Listening to the definition you just gave, it had like an air of optimism, which I don't feel...
Uncertainty.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
But I agree with you that we don't necessarily use hope in that context when we're speaking most of the time. It is wishful thinking. It's a kind of, sort of a stretch goal of, maybe it will happen, not with confidence. There's still some uncertainty around it.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because with these 2 years that, we've lived in massive uncertainty, it just makes me wonder if people have changed their definitions of or perception of hope. Because some, you can hope for things like once, twice, a third time, and then if it still doesn't happen, you've got to readjust your expectations. And I just wonder if these 2 years have had an effect on people.
Do you think we're less positive?
I think positive and being negative or pessimistic, I think they're quite polarized options, right, with this question. I would like to think perhaps people are more realistic, or they try to be a bit more pragmatic now. Instead of having stretch goals, they really think about, okay, let's have a max and a min, basically.
We sound any more like technology consultants as stretch goals. Okay, I have a question to ask you before we listen to Hope's story. And it's a bit of it is related, but it's a little bit left field. So, do you believe in organ donation, and are you a signed up card-carrying organ donor?
So I am not signed up. And it's a hard one. I think when it comes to that moment, if you were on the waiting list, of course you want to believe in the system, right? Or if someone dear to me is on a waiting list, I would be so grateful for whoever the donor and their family was. But I have to say, growing up in Asia, it's not something that we're really cool with. You don't touch a body after it's dead.
I can understand that. No, I can understand that.
Yeah.
No, that's an interesting question.
So Yeah. I mean, what about you and kind of what you believe in?
So I am a signed up card carrying member. People really close to me laugh because I do actually carry my card in my purse, or like my card holder. You know, it's
Mm.
always with my credit cards. Um, but in terms of like belief, I think I just, again, maybe it's rooted in what I knew growing up, which was kind of when the body, the physical side of, your life has ended, your soul, I mean, that is really the bit that's important. And if the soul has left the body,
Mm.
you're no longer inhabiting, that physical form. Um, then yeah, I'm all about if you can help someone short. And I think also being an ethnic minority in this country, I think things like signing up to registers for white cell counts or bone marrow, because there is such a call within communities where they're not as widely represented, or even blood banks. So yeah, I mean, I'd be happy for whoever's there to make the decision about what's going to go where when it happens, because I don't think at that point I am Neha in my body, right? I think the soul has left the physical
You
form.
see, in my culture, you have to be a whole, otherwise you won't rest in peace.
Yeah, and I can understand that.
So
I can understand that. I think
yeah.
as well, I mean, traditionally, if you were to think in India, like funerals happen very, very quickly. I mean, here in the UK, there's normally a little bit of a delay between when someone passes and a funeral, because the legalities, you need a death certificate, you need to
Mm-hmm.
book the appropriate services, and things like that. But in India, for example, the body, we believe in cremation, so the body is burned
Same.
very quickly. And quite often, there wasn't always the facilities to store the body, and the heat means that
Mm-hmm.
everything deteriorates very quickly. So that might also feed into it. So but at this point, yeah, I think I'd let somebody have whatever was of use. I mean, my eyes are of no use, which because I'm partially sighted. So
Same.
unfortunately, but everything else that's in good functioning working order.
This is sounding more and more like an advert that we don't need on this episode.
On that note, should we
Yeah.
listen to Hope and her story?
Hello, I'm Hope Reger. I live in a small town in Ohio, right outside of Columbus. I live there with my husband, Mike. I have two children, Brian, who's 31, and Justin, who is forever 19. I also have two beautiful granddaughters, Halen and Addie. They are my world. They're absolutely the best things ever. My day job is I'm a talent coordinator for a major financial institution, have been for about 25 years now. I'm blessed with that. And I'm also the founder and facilitator of Grief to Hope, which is a peer group, support group, grief group that I started in honor of my son, Justin. So before 2016 and the trauma that I experienced, life was pretty good. I grew up in even a smaller town in Ohio, and my parents were divorced at age 8. My mom held grudges still to this day, and that's over 40 years ago. We'll leave it at that. She's still angry. And my dad married soon after that. My mom and it was my sister and my mom and we moved around a lot. She found jobs, but she moved around. So we were never really had that home base feel. I was left alone quite a bit. I eventually, at a young age, got pregnant with my oldest son and moved out on my own. And I worked very, very hard to prove people wrong. They thought that since I was at a young age that I would never amount to anything. I would be a statistic. I would never be able to take care of myself. And I was determined to prove that being a mom was number one, and I was going to work hard. And I took care of my son, and I just was determined to prove everybody wrong. And then in 97, I met my husband and had my youngest son, Justin. And he had a medical condition that was undiagnosed. And when he was 27, he had 5 bypasses at the age of 27. And we lost everything. He was self employed. And I just had my bank job. And we ended up losing everything, our house, our home. We went from, he had huge medical bills, and we were self employed, and we ended up surviving through that. He went through some major depression as well. But again, I was determined to make it. And I took on 2 jobs, and I wanted to make sure that I was determined that we weren't going to fall. After that, ironically enough, we made it through all that. He had children and I had children. And then when they were grown, we ended up divorcing. I guess we didn't have anything else in common besides the kids and the chaos. But we're still friends to this day. But we divorced in 2015, which is when I met my husband, my current husband, Mike, who's the light of my life. And Mike was from Columbus, and I ended up moving to Columbus for my job. My oldest son, Brian, was he was settled. He had had his kids. He bought a house, so he was settled in Xenia, our hometown. And then Justin bounced back and forth between Columbus and his friends. He was 18, 19 years old, and really didn't want to leave his friends, which I understood. We were about 2 hours away. So he finally settled in with 2 roommates in September of 16, and I was living in Columbus. So in November 17th, 2016, I had a knock on my door, and I saw 2 policemen standing outside. And I thought, as a mother of 2 sons and one being fearless, I thought, what has that child done? I thought TPing houses. I mean, I don't know what I thought. I don't even know if TPing houses was a thing, but I just thought he was in trouble. And I opened the door, and they asked me if I was Justin's mom. And I said, yes, absolutely. And they handed me a piece of paper that said, you need to reach out to this person. It had a name and number, and to give them a call as soon as possible. They've been trying to reach me. And I asked the policeman, I said, do you know what this is about? And they said no. And to this day, I don't know if they did or they didn't. And they just were lucky they didn't have to tell me. And so I shut the door, went upstairs, dialed the number, and the person on the other line said, Greene County Coroner. And that's when my world changed. That few seconds, my world changed from semi-normal, halfway non-traumatic life events to the worst pain a mother could experience. So after the phone call, I hung up, and everything, it was a blur. It was like a fog. And that's the way I describe like that week or 2 weeks, as just like a fog. I also describe it sort of like candle melting, like it's there, but it's sort of like all melted together. The first thing after I hung up, you're in shock. Like you really don't know what to do. You don't know what the right thing to do is. So I ended up calling, and I called my oldest son. He was in shock. And then I ended up having to call my ex and then the grandparents. And for whatever reason, everybody answered their phone at 6:30 in the morning, which is ironic. I mean, I don't know if I would do that, but everybody answered their phone. And then it was, okay, it was sort of the robot, the autopilot kicked in, where I was like, okay, I got to get dressed, I got to get ready, and I got to get home. And I felt like I had to get home to somehow, it felt like I had to take care of him. Like I had to find him. And the coroner had told me that was pronounced at the hospital, but they had already moved him to the morgue, and I wasn't able to see him until I get him to a funeral home. And as a mother, you never even think about something like that, let alone trying to figure it out in the midst of this fog. So I raced home. It's a 2 hour drive, which that drive to this day, I remember a friend of mine, one of my very good friends, calling me. And I talked the whole way there about the story and what had happened and what I knew. And I told her, that the coroner had let me know that Justin got into an altercation with his roommate. It had turned into a verbal altercation that turned into, name calling and that kind of thing, and then a physical altercation, and then punches and hits were thrown, and then Justin apparently had him up against a wall, and he told the police he didn't feel there was an exit, and he pulled his gun, put it to Justin's chest and shot and killed him. So I repeated that in my head, but I really didn't understand it. Like, it wasn't like sinking in. Like, it wasn't like that didn't happen. Like, I was watching it on the news is what it felt like. So once I got home, I went straight to my son's house, who lives in our hometown, and everybody started to come over at that time. And you repeat the story over and over and over again. And you think to yourself, how am I going to get through it? And then my mission, as I always work, like I'm determined, was to get him to a place where I could see him. So I remember reaching out to tons of funeral homes, not knowing, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know. I was very upset with the way that some funeral homes handled things. They were like, well, you have to have this money up front. And not that we didn't have insurance or anything like that, or savings or whatever, but I thought, wow, this is the first thing you throw on me is my son's passed, and you're like, I got to come up with $10,000. And I know it's their job, and I know that they deal with it every day, but that was probably the worst feeling, because you felt almost like I was hopeless. Like, I couldn't bring him home till I fronted this money, right? It was probably that was probably the worst feeling in the world. Like, I was letting him down because I couldn't get him home. I had to figure it out. And so eventually I did. And, we got him there, and I couldn't see him they couldn't bring him there because of the autopsy and the examinations and the investigation. So I couldn't bring him home, or couldn't bring him to the funeral home for at least, I think it was a day or two. It felt like a forever, like I couldn't see him. And then donors called, like, not donors, but this is something that I don't think people realize. Once your son's, your significant person or whatever passes, then of course they want you to be a donor. And Justin had been an organ donor, but going through that, like, they literally asked some really sensitive questions. And I know that they're in a hurry, right? They're in a hurry because, they need to get it. But I was not prepared for that whatsoever. So that's something that you never, ever, ever think you'll be talking about. And then he didn't have clothes. Justin didn't have clothes. And so, just how am I going to get clothes to him? And you just think of it as a mother. But that whole day, and probably a couple of days later, was pretty much fog. But there was things that, calling the insurance company and trying to get all the money situation done, and just things that you would never, ever imagine having to deal with the first day you find out your child has been killed. I've always been a person that respects everybody's rights, and that if you believe in carrying a gun or having a gun, that is absolutely your right. If you believe it's something that you use to protect your family, my thoughts have never changed on that. I still believe it's your right. I still believe that if you want to carry a concealed weapon and you do it the right way, and it's legal, then it's absolutely your choice. I've never been one to be pro one way or the other with guns. However, I've always been scared to death of guns myself, and I don't even like to see a gun. If somebody, like, I remember a family member bringing out a gun one time just to show another family member. And I had a lot of anxiety about it. So for me personally, I would never feel comfortable with one. And maybe that's something that I need to maybe take a lesson or learn, because I always feel like if I know and am educated about it, I'm more comfortable about it. But as far as rights, it's everybody has their own right to do whatever they choose. So after the event occurred and Justin's funeral was over, after that first initial few weeks, everybody goes back to normal. And it's sort of like, wait a minute, my life's normal. I can't go back to that same normal. And I reached out. My work I was lucky enough with my work that they have a program that you can seek counseling, and it's absolutely free up to a certain point. But I was lucky enough, and one of the counselors at my work actually reached out and said, "Here, this is something that we offer." So I was blessed to find this amazing counselor who just was incredible. And as a parent, you deal with a lot of the what ifs after your son. Like, what if I would have? Because Justin called me that evening, and after it happened, I didn't answer the phone. I was on my way to the movies, and I thought, oh, he needs money or something like that. And I said, he'll call back. And as you do as a parent, and we walked into the movie theater. He never called back. And I had that guilt of not answering that phone. And I could have said, I love you that one more time. And so there was a lot of what ifs. And the counselor was amazing to tell me that, Justin had free will. Like, what if I would have made him stay in Columbus? He wouldn't have been in that situation. What if I would have, did this or that? And she just told me that the most amazing thing was Justin had free will. And so no matter how many things I would have done, he would have chose to do a certain path. And that, God chooses not to intervene in certain circumstances as well. So that helped a lot. And then she suggested a grief share group. And with this grief share, it was Christian based. And I'm not very well educated when it comes to Christianity. I didn't grow up in a church atmosphere. We believed in God, but we didn't go to church or anything like that. So it was very overwhelming for me. But the people that were there, it was a very small group. There was 4 or 5 of us. And I remember sitting in there and feeling very awkward. I was the only one that had lost a child. Some of them had lost spouses. Some of them had lost their mother. And the lady that led it, Emily, was amazing. And she taught me a ton about God and the Bible and what my purpose is, or what, God always gives us a purpose. And it was amazing. It was a 70s and 80s kind of old grief share like workbook. Like there was like Zig Ziglar. If you remember Zig Ziglar, he it was a great speaker. And so it was more of a 70s, 80s kind of workbook, and it was based on Christianity, which was awesome. But that's where my grief idea started coming through. So as I'm leaving one of the grief groups, I'm still angry at God, right? He took my son, and I'm still angry. And the grief group told me that was okay to be angry. And so I was angry, and I'm yelling at God, and on the way home, and I'm in my car, and I say, why did you take Justin? What do you want from me? What is my purpose? I'm supposed to have this purpose. What is it? And as I heard, like on the radio or in my head, or I don't even know how it happened, but I heard the words, be kind, just be kind. And I thought, that's my purpose. I'm pretty kind. I mean, I'm a good person. And I thought, that's my purpose, is to just be kind. Okay, I can be kind. And so I remember saying, okay, so I got to be kind. That means pay it forward, volunteer, say nice things to people, be approachable, not make people feel awkward around me when they talk about Justin, those kind of be kind issues. And so I remember going in a coffee shop. It was a Tim Hortons drive-thru. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try to pay it forward today. And I thought, God's going to have to make me rich if he wants me to pay it forward all the time. But so I told the person the cashier that I wanted to pay for the gentleman behind me. And when I said that, the I looked up and the gentleman's name on his tag was Justin, and that was my son's name. And I was like, wow, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm just supposed to be kind. Wow, this is easy. I can do this. And of course, the tears are flowing, and I'm trying to hurry up and get out of there before the guy sees me. And because when you do something, you try to do it with integrity and not expect anything. I didn't want any kudos. I didn't want thank yous. I just wanted to get out of there and know that maybe I made a difference in his day. So that's when everything started to come together, and I started thinking, how can I be kind and honor my son at the same time? So after thinking a long time, for it was been 3 years, I thought, okay, I need to write a book or speak or go to counselors and see if I can help out with that. I just didn't know what I could do. And then last year, COVID hit. And COVID created this death talk every day, is what I feel like. We were literally counting deaths every single day. And I don't know if I ever remember in my lifetime that we sat there and every day had a countdown of deaths. And it was horrible. And to hear the talks about people not being able to be in the hospital, as their loved ones passing, or not being able to be in the nursing homes, and just the amount of death and sickness was everywhere. And I thought, what can I do to help? And it hit me. I thought, oh, wow, we're on virtual, right? With every single job that I was doing, I was on a call for my work. And so I was like, Zoom, I could create something virtually to maybe help people that are grieving. And that's when, I don't know how the words came to me and the program came to me, but Grief to Hope was born last June. And it's a 7-week program that I created and copyrighted, and I'm all fancy now, with the business name. And I created the logo, and I just felt so cool. But I wanted a safe space for anybody grieving, and it didn't matter what that grieving was. If it was your parents, your spouse, your child, if it was 10 years ago, if it was a year ago, if it was a day ago. I wanted a safe space for people to come to share their story, to hear stories in a very family oriented, just be your authentic self. We all understood what you were going through, and Grief to Hope was it. And it's a 7-week program that's completely free. It's for 1 hour every week. And I start the program with an introduction. The first week we do the introduction, and then we do the next week I spell out the word grief. So we do G is gift of time. So we talk about how time can be a gift, or it can also hamper when, people expect you to hurry up and get back to the person you used to be. And sometimes that never happens. And so time can also make things worse sometimes, and people expect things. And then we spell out the word grief in the next courses. And then our last course is to hope. And that's sort of where we take the next step. Like, what do you want to do next? And it can be as big as create a Grief to Hope group. But most of the time it's, I want to go to the grave and actually go up to the grave, or I don't want to sit in my car, or I want to listen to a song and not cry. I want to go through his pictures. I want to talk about him more. I want to write a book. It could be anything, but we sort of say, okay, what's the next steps? And so it's grief all the way up to hope. And then you can repeat the class over and over again. We have most of my people come back. We start our 4th session in September. And you can just repeat it, because it's basically, we start with the main topic, like I said, and then we branch off into other topics, and we're just there for each other, and we get it. And it's just that amazing feeling like I'm not going through this alone. If I had the chance to talk to him, which I probably in my lifetime would never want that or ask for that, I would absolutely just tell him that I forgive him. And I know that sounds horrible from a mother to somebody that's just shot and killed your son and took on God as a responsibility, but I can't hold that anger. And one of the best things that came of this was I had the option, and this gentleman filed self-defense and no criminal charges were um, pending, or he was never indicted. um, so he has to live with this each and every day, and I have to live with it each and every day. And his way is way different than my way. But I had two choices. I could either be angry and ask for revenge and hope that he lives a horrible, terrible life, or I can forgive him and put all that anger and frustration, energy into honoring my son. And that's what I have to do. I have to do, if I want to experience joy again, I have to honor my son and forgive him. So I would absolutely let him know that I forgive him. Grief to Hope is way bigger than me. When I started Grief to Hope, I thought, okay, I'll start with this and see how it goes. And I have to earn it every day. And I have to honor my son every day. So, hope for the future for me is making Grief to Hope the biggest support group that people will go to that feel comfortable and know that it's there and that people understand and get it. But not only that it's there to listen to your story, for you to listen to other people's stories, it's to provide you that hope that will inspire you to keep on living strong. And that when you're doing grief, you're a warrior, and you're the strongest people on earth are people that grieve. The mother that gets up every day after losing a son but still packs lunches and makes Christmas great and does everything for their other children because she has to keep on living. And that's what you have to do. You have to keep on living strong. And for me, Grief to Hope gives me that inspiration to get up every day and make a difference. So how would I rate life? Wow. So I'm actually going to say a 10. And I'm going to say that I rate life a 10 because I get to live out my purpose that was given to me and to create some value for others. And I don't know many people that can do that or get the chance to do that. So I've had my ups and downs in life, and Lord knows, trauma has affected my life, but I can't let it stop me. And I be determined to create something good, not only for myself, because it's not fun to be alone and be happy. I need to create something for others to give them inspiration and hope that life is good and you got one chance to make it right. So you can do one of two things. You can be a victim or a survivor, and I absolutely want to be that survivor.
Okay, so that was a pretty heavy to start with, but full of light, I think, at the end story to listen to. Should we talk about some of the big concepts in there? So first of which, I think before we listen to Hope's story, you already mentioned grief. And I'm sure most, if not all, of our listeners know about or have heard about the 7 stages of grief. So yeah, let's talk about grief and how we deal with it. I think a lot of the start, the shock, denial, all of that anger, we're quite familiar with. We've probably all experienced it. But I want to take a closer look at the latter stages, which Hope, who told her story, has clearly sailed through, from acceptance to actually turning that into something else. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on grief? Do we grieve properly as modern day people?
So do we grieve properly? I think there is this tendency to rush all of our emotion in current times. Do you feel that?
100%. I think we definitely prioritize, tick box, let's get things out of the way. And sometimes it's more ceremony rather than actually going through it.
It's interesting you say ceremony, right? Because like we were saying, I think we even talked about it on the death culture episodes in season 1. We both come from cultures where there are very prescribed ceremonies and ways of grieving in the immediate aftermath after someone dies. And even like to the extent in my culture, and I know this is like also true in the Jewish culture, that there are things that you do or follow or don't do for up to a year after that person has passed to honor them. But I don't know how much of that is about them and how much of it is about you and what you feel.
That's the thing. So in a lot of, again, just to remind people, I'm really into true crime. So a lot of the times before people really started looking into the psychology of grief, there have been a lot of incidents where parents or loved ones of a victim were portrayed as being cold, being like, wait, you did it because you didn't grieve the right way in front of the camera, right? But since then, we've now discovered that people grieve very differently. Sometimes you might not, the feeling doesn't hit you, and then suddenly 3 months later, you're suddenly crying. So I think what you said there, that grief should really be about you and not the rules.
Because there is no right way.
Mm-hmm.
There's not one. Although we talked about the 7 steps of grief, and actually Hope has put together that amazing program of.
Yeah.
But I think she said it in her own words. Like, there's no limit on how many times somebody can go through that.
Yeah.
Program, or how many weeks it takes somebody, or even when somebody's ready to start the program. Because like you say, it might hit you 3 months down the line, it might hit you a lot further down the line.
Well, and I think also with feelings, I always feel like things are two sides of the same coin, right? What I mean by that is we can feel grief, but we can also feel happiness, right? And if you look at memories, we don't really think twice about it, but you can think of a happy memory and n number of times and still feel that happiness. Or when we like eating, so we can almost taste it in our mouth, if you think about certain foods that we love. And that's how we should think about grief. It can resurface from different triggers. It could be a smell, it could be a song, it could be anything, it could be a word. And I think we should give it as much thought as we do happy memories.
Well, so we had a guest earlier in the season, and if you haven't listened to the episode, do go back and listen. April was our first guest, and she said something about how just because it's been a long time, I say long time in terms of a number of years since her parents passed, it doesn't mean she doesn't cry for them, or that, she cried in the episode. It doesn't mean that she doesn't remember them or that her pain isn't still there. It's just that she's found different ways to cope and to move forward, and to also be able to see the happy memories alongside, the grief that's probably still with her. I want to touch on a really pivotal part of Hope's story. And that's, how her son was killed.
Yeah.
We both talked about this before, I know, but we don't live in countries where everybody has the right to bear arms, because the UK laws are not that way. Obviously, Hope is living in America, so slightly different there. But above and beyond talking about gun control, actually, the thing I wanted to ask you was, do you think that's ever forgivable?
I think it's important to, I personally go by forgive doesn't mean forget, right? And I think forgiveness is a big thing. I don't want to go into should or shouldn't, but I think personally it's a very difficult can, if that makes sense. Like, I'm sure over time, for a crime like this, intent comes a lot into it for me. If it's an accident, if I believe it's an accident, I think I will find it easier to forgive. But I know there are people out there who are, the victim advocates, and sometimes I think in the US, don't they have, you get to talk to the victim's family, right? And I think that is a very cathartic, very, very good thing to do. But I don't know, maybe I'm a vengeful person. I think it's going to be a pretty hard one to forgive, especially if, in kind of US systems, if it's a first degree, if it's premeditated, if it's a planned murder, I find that very hard to forgive, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I should have clarified, really. I think what we were saying there was, in Hope's case, it wasn't proven to be premeditated. And I absolutely applaud her propensity to find compassion and forgiveness. Because whilst I would like to think I am that, I can be a bigger person, I think, obviously I don't have a child, but I could imagine if, say, that happened to my mother, could she forgive? If her child was taken in that way. I think there's probably also a point of where Hope is as well, is that, she's come through this and she's living and thriving. And maybe part of that is to get on and to live a quality of life that feels and has joy and, brings some level of actual happiness. You have to be able to find it in your heart to, if you say, like you say, not necessarily forgive and forget, but forgive to the point of not being vengeful or angry towards that person.
I think potentially contentious, but I think it is possible to get over something without forgiving. I think it's okay to not forgive. I don't think everything can be forgiven, but it's also okay to get over it and let go and move on.
Which is why I asked the original question, is it forgivable? Because you can not necessarily accept, like, you can accept that, someone you love is gone, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you forgive the person that may be responsible or the circumstances around it. It just means that you found a way of processing and dealing with it for your own sanity and to move forward. It just reminds me of that, oh my gosh, a completely different track, because of course we love a sidebar, but in The Hills, where Elsie said to Heidi, I forgive you, but I want to forget you. So about their friendship. And I probably misquoted it, but people will know what I'm saying. Forgiveness and redemption and moving forward, all very interesting things. And I don't think there's one exact answer, because this scenario has not, or something of this magnitude has not happened to us.
Yeah. But also, as a last thing, I just want to remind people a really important but very overlooked thing, I think, is to learn to forgive yourself. Whatever the incident was, I think that's actually the hardest thing to do.
I agree. Do you know why people blame themselves for not being there, or if I'd have been there, I could have done that?
Survivor's guilt almost. Yeah. Okay, so, and on that note, we'll come back next week for another story.
Subscribe, rate and review on your favourite podcast platform, and follow us on Instagram at Culturally Speaking Podcast. You can also check out our website, culturallyspeaking.co.uk, for a transcript of this episode. Share your stories or your show ideas with us by sending us an email at theculturallyspeaking@gmail.com.